Hi honeys, today we are making the Becky Set. It is a halter top with an internal bra finished with elastic at the bottom and a skort. So there's a skirt with hidden shorts underneath so that you're not going to have any slips this summer. It also comes in a few different length options, a top that hits at the natural waist, one that hits below the natural waist, and then we have a skort that hits the natural waist and one that hits about 2 inches below that at the high hip. The instruction booklet is super detailed, and this tutorial is also going to be super detailed, taking you through step by step how to make the set. But if it is your first time sewing with knits or you're very beginner, I created an entirely separate video that has all the tips you need to get started working with knit fabrics. If you want to go and watch that before or after you watch this tutorial, then please feel free. It's a great resource. You don't need to sew the Becky Set to use that video. And if you need to get your pattern, then of course it's linked below. Get it printed out and we'll get started. There's a few measurements that we're going to use to determine the size that we're going to use, and those are going to be the full bust, which is the fullest part of your bust, the waist at your natural waist at the smallest part. If you are sewing the low-waisted skort, you will want to measure the high hip, which is going to be about 2 inches below your natural waist, and then your full hip, which is right around the widest part of your hip. The fabric that we recommend for this pattern has 4-way stretch, which means that it has lengthwise and crosswise stretch. So it's going to stretch up and down and side to side when you pull it, and it needs to have at least 50% stretch for it to fit properly, and good recovery, which means when you pull it, it bounces back into shape. Generally, these fabrics are going to have a spandex content. You may also know that as elastane or lycra, and that is a fiber that allows the knit fabrics to snap back after they're stretched to give you a really nice tight fit and give you some support if you need it as well. Today I'm using an organic cotton jersey from Lyrical Fabrics, and it has about 70% stretch. If you are using fabric with 70% or more stretch, we recommend sizing down one size from your measurements just to account for how much looser that stretchy fabric is going to be. So I am going to size down one from my measurements today. And if you have a fabric with less stretch, it's a little more difficult to work out what to do, because the stretch really allows the garment to contour around your curve, stretch over your bum and your boobs, and fit really nicely. So as you start to go down in stretch, if you size up, it doesn't necessarily mean the garment is going to fit exactly as intended. But if you have a fabric that you love and it has a lower stretch, I just recommend play around, have a bit of fun with it, maybe size up a little more than you think, just so then you can take away. But we don't necessarily recommend choosing a fabric with lower stretch. To test your stretch percentage, we are going to take a piece of fabric, don't cut it off, just use your fabric on the edge and fold it over, measure out 10 inches or 10 centimeters, however you want to work. Put some pins in so that you can remember where that 10 inches or 10 centimeters is, and then gently stretch the fabric until it doesn't stretch anymore. Now don't stretch it until like it's within an inch of its life and it's starting to lose its color and be see-through. Just stretch it until it sort of pulls back, and then record that number. Each inch or centimeter that it stretches over the pin size is going to be equivalent to 10% stretch. So if you pulled it and it went to 14 inches, that would be equal to 40% stretch. So we really want our fabric to be measuring up to 15 inches or higher, and that will give us our 50% stretch. I want to talk a little bit about elastic before we get started, because we have a couple of different types of elastic in the requirements. This is rubber swimwear elastic. This is very strong elastic. It's what I'm going to use in my version, and I've used in my other versions because I need a little support. I don't mind things feeling a little bit tight on my body. A softer option would be woven elastic, and then the softest option would be knit elastic. Knit elastic is really stretchy and soft, and it will just stabilize the seams, but it won't add a lot of support, and it will be really nice and comfortable. So choose your elastic appropriately. You need 1/4 inch elastic for inside the seams, and then 3/4 inch elastic for the bottom of the facing on the top. and I'm choosing a woven elastic for that because I don't have any rubber elastic, and also rubber elastic at this wide might be a little too tight for me. Now, all of the fabric requirements, elastic requirements, everything like that is in tables in the instructions. So I'm not going to go through how much you need, but feel free to go and check that out and make sure that you order enough for the project. Now we know exactly what sizes we're using. We're going to grade between the sizes on the pattern pieces so that we get the exact right size for our body measurements. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you the top. Grading is not as scary as you think it is. It's basically just blending the lines between the sizes to give the right amount of ease at each point on your body. So for this example, I'm going to show you how to grade between a larger bust and a smaller waist. This line is the larger bust line, and we're essentially going to follow that all the way along the top of the pattern piece. And then when we get to the bottom of the dart, this is the dart for the larger size. We want a smaller size in the waist, so we're going to find the waist notch on the smaller size, and we want to trace from this point up to the larger size at the bottom of the dart. And you can do it with a straight line first with a pencil and then blend it with a smooth curve if that makes it feel a little bit easier, but you do sort of want the line to extend smoothly without any angles. And then for the bottom of the top, you'll just use the smaller line. And then on this bit, on your pattern piece, it will say cut on fold, and you always want the fold to be completely straight. Don't ever try and like grade or change this line, because essentially when we cut the fabric, it's just going to be the exact same on the other side. So if you change this line, you would have to add in seam allowance, you would have to cut the two pieces separately and sew them together. But as it is, the pattern piece is going to be double the size mirrored on this side. And then for the back top, you'll choose your larger size for the upper area. And then essentially from the top, you'll connect it down to the notch on the waist at the smaller size. And then use the smaller size for the bottom of the top. And it works the same way going from a larger waist to a smaller bust. Just make sure your line is nice and smooth. And the same with the front of the top. Just start below the dart on the smaller size and draw a smooth curve out to the waist notch on the larger size. When you cut your facing pieces, so the facing like the internal bra, you would basically just trace these changes onto your facing pieces so that you don't have to try and do the grading the same again. Just lay it on top and then trace the line that you made and cut out the facing pieces to match the outer pieces. For the skirt, you'll notice we have a straight line on them as well. So we're not going to touch the fold line. And then we have quite a few lines here. It can feel a bit confusing, but don't get overwhelmed. This is the high-waisted skirt and it's going to hit at your natural waist, and this is the low-waisted one where we measured at our high hip. So choose which height you're going to use, and you have to remember this for the shorts as well because the height needs to match for both. And then this is the hip notch on all of the pattern pieces, which indicates exactly where the hips are. So let's say we now have a smaller waist and we have larger hips. We'll just draw a smooth line down to the hip notch. And notice how I meet the line a little bit before the hip notch. That's because if I try and have it more straight, it's gonna have a weird angle. And remember, we want it to always be nice, smooth looking. I'm gonna trace the smaller line for the top and then the larger line for all of the bottom. And the same on the front skirt. So we have a larger waist and we're going for high-waisted. And then we're gonna just draw our smooth line down to a smaller hip size. And then use the smaller size for the bottom of the pattern piece. Finally, for the shorts, the front shorts is gonna look really similar to what we did on the skirt. just choose your height and your waist size and your hip size and draw that smooth curve down to the hip notch. And because we've chosen a larger hip size, we're going to use the bottom of the pattern piece for the hip size. The gusset, if you have a larger hip size, you will just use the larger gusset. And if you have a smaller hip size, you will just use the smaller size gusset. You don't need to make any changes to this pattern piece. And then the back shorts. So there's a straight line here, but as you can see, it's coming out. So this is not cut on the fold. We're going to cut 2 of these mirrored. So you could essentially touch this line, but we're still not going to, because all of our shaping for the hips is coming from the side seam here. And then also from this crotch seam here, we have a bigger distance between the legs on the bigger sizes to allow for like bigger bums and bigger measurements. So let's say we have a smaller waist in the low waisted. So we're going to choose the smallest size. And the lines are the same here, so we're going to just use the line. And then we have a larger size on the hips, so find the larger hip notch, draw a smooth curve, and then choose the larger line for everything at the bottom, and the larger line for this part. This is what goes between your legs, and the larger dot to match up the gusset. Hopefully you can see there's a little dot that you match on the gusset to the back shorts, and you'll just use the larger dot for both of these. And likewise, if you have a larger waist size and a smaller hip size, you will use the smaller line and the smaller dot, and then the smaller gusset. Now I have my pattern pieces cut out here, and I thought I would show you what the front of the top looks like. Cut on fold along this straight line here, and that means that you need to fold over the edge of the fabric, enough fabric that you can fit your pattern piece on comfortably, and then cut out around all the edges except for this folded edge. Obviously don't cut here, because then when we open it up, we want it to look like the whole front of a top. Like we discussed in the grading, quite a few of the pattern pieces are cut on fold, so make a note of those before you cut out, and make sure you are folding the fabric before you cut each of those pieces out. Now there is some markings that you need to mark. So each notch at the waist on the top and at the hip on the skirt and the shorts needs to be snipped into the fabric. Just a small snip. Don't go too far, less than 1/4 inch will be enough, so that you can match it up with the back piece or whatever other piece it's going to be matched with when you're sewing. And then you need to mark the darts on the outer top and the top facing. And to do that, I really like this method. It's super easy. I cut down one of the dart legs to the point, and then I really carefully fold along the other dart leg. And as you can see, that's left our dart exposed, and you can just use like a chalk or a fabric soluble marker to trace these lines onto the fabric. Don't forget to do both sides. And I do a little snip into the end of my dart legs, because it really helps when you're matching it up, just to know where the ends of the dart legs are. Forgot to say, all of our markings are going to go on the wrong side of the fabric. And then the only other marking that you need to put on the wrong side is there's a little dot on the back shorts, which is going to help us match up the gusset. Just a last note on the front shorts, just because I think this could be a tiny bit confusing. There is a little notch here, and it is cut on the fold, so don't cut along the center front, but you are going to cut up along this line to the notch, and then cut the notch as well, because when you unfold your front shorts, you do want there to be that split here between the legs. To sew the darts, we are going to fold the front top right sides together and match up the edges of the dart legs. Just add a few pins, and we're going to sew down towards the point of the dart, so have the pins facing this way towards the side seam. And repeat that on both sides, and also for the facing layer, because we'll just sew them all at the same time. Now don't worry that these look slightly different. They are a different shape, but it's only because one, we're going to press the seam allowance up and one down. So the shape on the side seam here is just matching the seam allowance. So it's nothing wrong with your top. Now using a medium zigzag, which is going to be a width of 3 and a length of 2.5, we're going to sew 3/4 of the way down the dart. And then when we get to the 3/4 mark, we are going to switch to a narrow zigzag, which will be 1.5 width and 2.5 length. Don't worry too much about these numbers. If you forget, they're at the top of every single page, and we tell you exactly what stitch settings to use for each step. When you change the width of your stitch, you need to turn the handle so that the needle is fully out of the project, because the needle will move from side to side when you change the width, and it's going to put pressure on the needle and on the fabric, and it might cause the needle to like snap, or probably not snap, but it's just best to have it out while you change it. So I'm going to change my width down to 1.5 and then finish my dart. And I just backstitched, which I caught on video, so please don't be like me. Pull your project out and tie a little knot in the threads. That's the most secure and proper way to finish the end of the dart. And then repeat that for all 4 of your darts. Now on your outer top, we're going to press the darts down, and on the top facing, we're going to press them up. Now with the front top facing right sides up, we're going to put the back top right sides facing down onto that and match up the bottom and the notches and the top of the seams. And we're going to sew down the side seams using a narrow zigzag stitch and 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we're going to do the same thing with the front facing and the back facing. And then on the outer top, we're going to press the seam allowance towards the back, and on the facing, we will press it towards the front to reduce the bulk. I'm going to put my outer top to the side because we're going to finish the bottom edge of the shelf bra. So you need to cut this 3/4 inch wide elastic that we're using for the underbust to 5/8 of an inch shorter than your underbust measurement. And then you're going to wrap it around you and see if it feels tight enough. Just bear in mind that we are going to overlap it by 3/8 of an inch, so don't take too much off, but if you want a tighter fit, just snip a little bit off until it feels comfortable. And then we're just going to put it under the machine, overlapped by 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to do a medium zigzag over both of the edges. Make sure you haven't twisted that when you're sewing it. Sorry, I should have said that before, but obviously you want it to be flat all the way around. And then we're going to take 4 pins, starting with the seam, put one in there, and then we're going to fold in half, put a pin in the other side, and then fold those together so that they match, and put a pin in either edge so that we have 4 exact quarters. And if you haven't already marked the center front and center back with notches, just fold the side seams together and either clip those or pin those. And we're going to match all of the points up with the pins on the elastic. So I like to go with the seam on my elastic with the center back. And this is going to go on the wrong side, by the way, because when we fold it up, we want it to be completely hidden by like the nice pretty side of the fabric. Now you'll notice that my top is a little bit longer than my elastic. What we're going to do is we're going to stitch this edge with a triple zigzag because that is our strongest, stretchiest stitch, as wide as you can go. And you're just going to slightly pull until the top matches the length of the elastic. Don't stretch when it's under the machine because it's going to stretch out and make the seams go wavy, but just gently pull the elastic until it matches the length of the top. This is what it should look like from the wrong side. And then what we're going to do is fold this over, and then we're going to stitch along this edge to hold it in place with another triple zigzag. And this is what your top facing should look like from the wrong side. No elastic showing. It's a bit difficult to see because of the busy print, but there should just be one line of stitching showing through from the right side. And this is the side that's also going to touch your body, so even if there's a tiny bit of elastic peeping over the edge here, this nice soft bit with no seams is going to be on your body. So with the shelf bra right sides facing out and the top wrong sides facing out, we're going to place the shelf bra inside the top. Match the side seams. And you'll see, because we pressed the seam allowances in opposite directions, that the side seam will sit together and then it won't be thick and bulky. Match along the back and pin. And then also match your straps. We're going to sew down the sides of the straps along the back and back up this other strap. And then we're going to sew this front neckline here. Do not sew the ends of the straps. We need to leave those open so we can connect them to each other. So now we've sewn the seams, we want to add elastic to them. And I've cut my elastic lengths according to the table in the instructions. And we're going to quarter them in the same way that we did with the underbust elastic, but you're just going to offset by 5/8 of an inch at the ends, because we don't want to have elastic in the seam allowance causing it to be like bulky and a big lump on the back of your neck. And then once you've pinned the elastic onto the outer top side, I'll meet you back here and I'll show you how to sew the elastic on so it doesn't roll. So the elastic needs to be over your stitching. The inside edge of the elastic should just match up with the inside edge of the stitching. So the elastic isn't overlapping like the body of the garment, but will probably very slightly overlap the seam allowance. But having it over the stitching is going to stop it from rolling. If you put it up against the edge within the seam allowance, it's going to roll around inside your garment and like stick out. This is exactly what it should look like when you've stitched it. Should be directly over the line of stitching. Okay, now we're going to sew the ends of the straps together, and this is the most complicated part of the whole process, and I promise it is actually super easy when you understand what's happening. So we're going to turn one strap inside itself so that it's right sides out. You just have to keep track of which side is which, because we're going to then put it inside this strap, and we want to match the neckline side with the neckline side and the outer edge side with the outer edge side, so that the strap isn't twisted when we pull it right sides out. Invert one strap so it's right sides out first. Now we have our right sides out strap. This side is the side that's connected to the neckline. See, it's going all the way up there, and then this side is coming around the side seam in the back. So following this, putting the neckline side in the direction of the neckline side on this strap, push it up through, and I just push mine up using my hand. But if you want, you could thread it with a safety pin or something like that. But doing it with my hand also helps me to keep it flat and not twisted. And then I always push it a little bit too far so that it peeps out the end. And then you can pull it down and then just wiggle the seam allowance until it matches. And as long as it's laying nice and flat, then we'll just sew across the end using a straight stitch and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then I'm just going to snip away a tiny bit of the seam allowance, but you don't have to do that, it shouldn't be too bulky. And then pull on this strap, and the top should be right sides out. Now the top and the facing, we want them to stick together. So what we're going to do is we're going to match the side seam down the facing and put your pins on the outside, because essentially what we're going to do is stitch in the ditch with a straight stitch just to hold the facing in the right place and stop the seams rolling or anything like that. And you want to do it from the right side so that it's as invisible as possible. shouldn't be able to see anything. Okay, we're ready to hem our top now, and I'm going to use seam tape in mine. This is a 1/4 inch wash away seam tape, which means that when you wash the garment, this will completely dissolve away. You don't have to use this. I just can't control the pressure of my presser foot or anything on my machine, and I do tend to get like a wavy stretched out hem on a lot of my knits, so I'm going to use this and it's going to stabilize the seam. Just stick it all the way around the edge, and then I usually press the hem up before I peel the paper back off, and then I just peel the paper back off a little bit at a time so that it doesn't stick everywhere and get really messy. The hem is going to be 1 inch, so you want to fold 1 inch up all the way around. And then we're going to sew with the widest triple zigzag that you have. And I like to stitch from the wrong side. You can stitch from whichever side, but I like to stitch from the wrong side so that I know I'm stitching right at the edge of the fabric. But if you do this, just be aware that your bobbin thread is going to be showing on the outside of your garment. So if you need to swap that out to match the color, then do that before you start. And you've finished your top. You may want to try it on to test the fit. You can always turn the straps back wrong side out and take away any length if you need to. And you shouldn't have the elastic rolling around the edge if you got it in the right place. But if you are, you could always go around the seams with a medium zigzag just to hold them in place. And remember, if you're trying to try it on while the seam tape is still in there, it's not going to stretch. So you need to wash the seam tape out before you try your top on. The first thing we're going to do for the skort is add the gusset to the back shorts. And to match it up, I'm going to put a pin through the dot on the gusset from the wrong side. And then put a pin through the dot on the shorts. Make sure that they're right sides facing. And the wide end is going to match up with this bit, which is the inseam. So this is what it should look like. And we're going to stitch from the end up to the dot using a 2mm wide zigzag stitch. And then taking our other back shorts piece, place this one on top and put a pin through the dot again, and then find the dot on the other piece. And then you can just match up the edges. And so from the dot down towards the end. And now we need to sew this bit together. So match the top edges right sides facing, and then all the way down to the gusset. And then the instructions say to use a 2mm wide stitch, but I'm actually going to go wider than that. I'm going to go with a 4mm wide stitch, and I'm going to just essentially do a smaller seam allowance, but it's going to work out the same because I'm just shifting my stitching over towards the edge a bit, because I sized down for this stretchier fabric, so I don't want my stitches to be popping because they're not stretchy enough. Now that your back shorts are done, we can place the front shorts right sides facing, and need to match the hip notches. And we're just going to sew down both the side seams, and I'm going to use a medium zigzag because of my stretchy fabric. And now we're going to press these seams towards the back. And with your center back seam, you can just press it to either side, it doesn't really matter, and press the gusset so that the seams are facing out. Once you've pressed the side seams, we are going to take the bottom of the legs and give them a memory press. So essentially we're going to press this up by 1 inch for the hem, and then we're just going to leave it with the crease in. We're not going to pin it or sew it or anything before we do the inseam, but once the leg is round, it just makes it so much harder to get in there and press, so we're going to do it now. So the hem should look like that, but we just left it free, and hopefully you can see there's like a crease here, and that should stay until we've sewn the inseam. Now we're going to match up the inseam, and I'll start by matching the bottoms of the shorts. And then match towards the middle. And then right in the middle, where we notched on the front of the shorts, is going to allow us to match up the seam around the gusset. And then sew down the inseam. And I'm just going to repress my hem, and I am going to add in the wash away seam tape like I used in the top, and then I'm going to sew it with a triple zigzag. Okay, I'm finished with my shorts, so I'm going to put them to the side while we do the skirt. Now you're going to lay your front and back skirt right sides facing, and we're going to match the hip notches, match the top and the bottom of the seams, and make sure everything is matched up perfectly, and then we're going to sew the side seams. And now I'm just going to press the seam allowance towards the front, and if you've forgotten which is the back and which is the front, the back is going to have a tiny bit more length just to fit over your bum and give you a little bit more coverage. So we're going to press the seam allowance towards the shorter side. Okay, now we have our skirt ready. We're going to attach it to the shorts. Okay, I know it seems counterintuitive because the skirt is supposed to be on the outside, but we're going to put the skirt inside the shorts. And we're also going to have them both right sides facing out, which will mean that the right side of the skirt is going to match with the wrong side of the shorts. So this is my shorts, opening them up, put the skirt inside and match the side seams. And there's the center front notches and the center back notch on the skirt with the center back seam on the shorts. And then we're just going to sew around with our 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'll show you how to add elastic. I've sewn my shorts and my skirt together. The shorts are still on the outside, and we're going to go through the same process of making our elastic into a loop and then quartering it and matching it up with the quarters on the top of the skort. We're going to put it onto the skirt side on the very inside and attach it this time to the seam allowance, so it's not going to be overlapping the stitches, and it's going to be like this. I will obviously show you once I've sewn it. This is what it looks like once the elastic is attached. And now I'm going to take the skirt from the inside and pull it upwards. And now don't fold it over yet. Now on the edge here, we're going to stitch the seam allowance to the skirt, obviously going in through so that we're only going through one layer of the skirt. Don't sew the front and the back together. But yeah, using a zigzag stitch, come along the edge here, essentially just going over where the elastic is and stitching it up towards the skirt. If you want, you can take this off your machine when you're doing something round so that it can fit underneath while you're sewing. And now you can fold your skirt down over your shorts, but the seam allowance is designed to stay up and the skirt just wrap over to cover it so that there isn't a seam along the top of the skort, it's hidden on the inside. And I'm going to give mine a really good press just to make sure that it stays in place, but this is what it should look like from the inside. A section of the skirt is going to stay in there covering the seam allowance, which is going to sit up against your body. And then from the right side, in the side seams, we are going to stitch in the ditch with a straight stitch just about 1 inch from the top, and that's just going to hold the skirt and the shorts in place with this little bit of the skirt on the inside so that it doesn't roll around. And then the final step is to hem your skirt 1 inch, exactly how we did with the top. I am going to add seam tape in mine, you don't have to, and then you are finished.